On this episode of the Catholic Echo podcast from the Diocese of Youngstown, brought to you by the annual Diocesan Appeal and Cumulus Radio Youngstown, we're talking about the Catholic Church and A.I. with Bishop David Bonnar, Grace Jones, Ph.D., and Superintendent Steven Jones, Ph.D. Find more about this episode's topic, including articles from the Catholic Echo, at www.catholicecho.org/podcast. And now the host of the Catholic Echo podcast, Dennis Viviana.
Hello and welcome to the Catholic Echo podcast. To kick off our new year, we have a discussion on the Catholic Church and the use of artificial intelligence. Here to weigh in on the subject is Bishop David Bonnar. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Dennis. It's always great to be here.
Now, it is a controversial subject, technology that is very much a work in progress, but what are your thoughts on the Catholic Church and the use of AI?
Well, first of all, I'm still kind of pinching myself because I can't believe after 36 years of priesthood we're having this conversation because it's so far removed from the church that I was born and bred into. It is a new phenomenon, and like anything new, it demands a certain respect and study. You know, respect comes from a Latin word which means to look at again. I think that there are wonderful opportunities, especially relative to learning, that come with this feature. And I know that some of them are even being utilized in classrooms today.
Yes.
But I think at the same time, there needs to be a certain appropriateness. We cannot become dependent on this, and we cannot lose our autonomy as human beings. That's pretty much, I think, the message of our Holy Father, that we need to be careful. So it's trying to find that right balance, if you will, where it enhances us, it enhances our life, our knowledge, without manipulating us or denigrating us in any way as human beings.
How do you think AI could be utilized in pastoral care or community outreach? And I guess what precautions should be taken?
Well, to be honest with you, that's something I think that the church needs to look at, and I don't want to prejudice the conversation because I need to know more about it myself. I will say that in his beautiful encyclical letter, Dilexit Nos, which it means he loved us, our Holy Father addresses the idea of artificial intelligence. And when he speaks about the importance of the heart, the whole encyclical is on the heart, he says, in this age of artificial intelligence, we cannot forget that poetry and love are necessary to save our humanity. So I think those are words of caution, and we can't lose the beauty and the goodness of life just as a result of technology. So I think we need to be careful in how we proceed and how this is utilized, not only in everyday life, but also in matters of the church.
Mm-hmm. Nothing really is going to ever replace the written word, and I know it's something you take a lot of pride in, your writings. Have you used the technology yourself, and are you still in the research process of it?
Well, I was first introduced to it about a year ago at Walsh University. I'm a member of the board, and they had a presentation for the board members on AI and what could be done. It really was fascinating to see how it can be a very helpful instrument in the classroom and just for learning. That particular day, we did not address the ethical or moral concerns that can come with that. So, I think it's something that needs more study and more research. I think we also, I am old school, I don't need to read the newspaper with the newspaper anymore. I've advanced to being able to read it online, but, we are creatures of habit and we are true to our roots. So this is, I know for someone who's in their 20s or 30s, this is like, wow, it's got to be just amazing. It's amazing to me, but I'm kind of intimidated by it as well.
I think that's totally natural to be intimidated by it. Now, how do you see AI impacting the spiritual lives of individuals or communities?
That's a good question. I think that's a question that is just going to need to continually be asked. We can't make our prayer fake or mechanical. And I think the danger of using AI is that it could be, we lose the heart of our prayer.
Yes.
And I think that's what the Holy Father is referring to in his encyclical letter, that we can't lose the heart and we can't lose those eternal realities of beauty and goodness and that are manifested in love and poetry.
Bishop Bonnar, thank you so much. Coming up next, Diocese of Youngstown Communication Manager Megan Farrell takes a deeper dive into the world of AI. Keep it here, much more to come when the Catholic Echo podcast returns.
Wondering what happened to timely Catholic news in the Diocese of Youngstown? It's at CatholicEcho.org. Sign up for the email newsletter while you're there to have Catholic news delivered to your inbox.
I'm Megan Farrell, welcoming you back to the Catholic Echo podcast. I'm Communications Manager with the Diocese of Youngstown. But when I'm not doing that, I am also in a PhD program for educational technology at Kent State University. I am joined here today by Dr. Grace Morris, who is a professor in the program teaching master's level students in technology trends in education. So thank you so much, Dr. Morris, for joining us today.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
What we wanted to do in this session is really tap into your expertise. You know, we've talked a bit about what kind of the ethical perspective on AI. We'll be talking in our next section on AI in the Catholic schools, but I really wanted your technical expertise, if you could. Like, you break down AI for teachers who may be experiencing it for the first time. So can you just imagine that we're one of those students in your classes, and kind of how do you introduce AI for folks who are kind of being exposed to it for the first time?
Yeah, of course. So artificial intelligence actually has been around for a while. It really is the development of computer systems that are capable of performing tasks that typically require human intelligence. So essentially, it is something that's coming in and acting like a human. That's kind of like how I like to describe it. It involves machine learning, which is a subset of AI that involves training algorithms on data to make predictions or decisions without being explicitly programmed. Deep learning is involved as well. So this is something, as I'm sure you've already talked about, that could be kind of daunting. It's a little scary because it's the unknown. Anything that's unknown is scary. And when artificial intelligence, specifically through ChatGPT, that's really when it boomed. This became available to the public. It's free. You can search for it on your own. This is a chatbot. AI can be used in various sectors, but this is just one. But when it boomed out in education and became a hot topic, it was kind of, I'd say, late 2022, early 2023. It started out being with just kind of a concern by many teachers, schools, both at K-12 level and also in higher ed. And I would argue that it still is something that is very unknown by a lot because it's been developing and advancing so much that we can use AI in so many facets in education. Like I mentioned, chatbots, we can use it to help now with tutoring. We can use it to help write our papers. That's just a very basic level that I can bring off the top of my head. You can search this out and find multiple forms of AI just even within your own search engine. So this is something that's very large within the educational sphere and really all of our lives. And I know you've already touched on the ethical base, but that's kind of the basic breakdown of what it is.
Thank you so much. That's really helpful. And as you're walking through folks who are encountering it the first time, and especially those who are thinking about how they might implement it, you know, whether it's in the classroom or even in their personal lives, what are some of the benefits that you see coming out of it, some of the ways that they are using it, and then also maybe some things that you might caution them about when they start using it?
There's a ton of benefits. I think the big thing that comes out is efficiency. So in education, we got to think about the two spheres. So there's actually three. So there's admin, teachers, and students, and then the community as a whole, because you bring in the parents as well. So when it comes to efficiency, like when you're teaching, this is something that we can use to create lessons that can also help with aspects of grading that can make just tasks faster. If you're trying to think of new ideas, this is something that you can utilize. But there's a lot of caveats with that because we're not at the level in which I would argue that AI can really mirror humans, because there's still areas in which there are problems. So AI is created by humans. Humans themselves have biases. So for instance, if a student is using AI to write a paper, for instance, so again, efficiency comes in for the student side, and it can also come in for the admin side as well. They might be looking for references in a paper and actually maybe use AI so they can search it out, and it's so easy. They can write everything up and not even have to use their brain at all. But the issue with this is that AI usually creates what's known as hallucinations. So it will piece together information and not really give you a true reference. It will create a reference for you. And it's just coded and created. And so that's one of the major challenges that comes along with AI, is that students are using this, of course, to try to be efficient, but artificial intelligence themselves aren't really giving them true information. And then on top of it, when you are talking about efficiency, we can talk about issues of cheating and just using these tools without really using them correctly, as we call it. So, of course, the benefit is efficiency, and you can think of creatively in many different ways for how you're using artificial intelligence, but that disadvantages, maybe it's a clutch for some. And in education, we really have to think about how are we using it and how can we use it to benefit and create so many different possibilities, because it is a great tool to have, but you have to use it correctly, as with any sort of tool out there.
And so for our audience members as well who are outside of the education sphere, you mentioned, how much it impacts the community. We may have folks who say are grandparents who are trying to get in touch with what their grandkids are getting exposed to, or maybe they're volunteering at Catholic charities or something like that. And what are some of your favorite creative uses for AI for the everyday person?
I've heard people use the chatbots specifically because I think that that's the easiest thing to get access to, like create itineraries for traveling or ideas for vacation. Aren't really certain either one, how to create an itinerary for a destination. So they ask the chatbot to do it for them, or the AI to do it for them, not the chatbot, the AI itself. And that's an interesting thing in and of itself, because it gives them ideas that you wouldn't have thought of initially. So I think that one's an interesting one. I think especially in the sort of atmosphere today where jobs are getting harder and harder to get, people have used AI to help create quote unquote accurate resumes that can go through and pass the ATS system. So that's another big thing as well. But definitely, I think just using it to spark ideas is a fun and big one that I always like to say, hey, like you can create a travel itinerary, or maybe you aren't sure what to make for dinner this week and you need some creative ideas, and you don't have the time to sit there and really think about it. That's where artificial intelligence is kind of fun to play around with, just for everyday things.
For folks who are maybe a little concerned about AI, or maybe want to protect their privacy, because I know one of the issues with the AI has been them taking kind of information off the internet that maybe people didn't think they were going to be used to train AI. Any recommendations you have as well from the flip side? So we have folks who will be enthusiastic and want to dive right in and test it out. But if they want to protect their privacy or make sure, their information is not being used for those kind of systems, do you have any advice there?
As anything advances, you got to think about those challenges, and privacy is a big one just across the board. Honestly, if you are worried about those aspects, I think the biggest thing I always recommend when dealing with tools is to research what is going on. So Google is your friend. Look it up, see how the different AI systems are utilized. Because again, like I mentioned, there's many, many of them. See what kind of data that they are collecting about you, and then assess your own comfort level. It's okay to be like, you know what, I really don't like the use of this, but I think it's okay to be scared of something, but we really need to understand it as well in order to really understand what's going to happen in the next 10, 20, 30 years, because I will say is going to change how we think about our lives and what will happen in jobs, what will happen in education, everywhere. It will change a lot. It's a great tool. It's advancing quickly, but we need just to look at how it's made and who is making it and ethical sides of that. So really, I recommend always like, okay, again, ChatGPT, how does that really work? Google it. Go into the Google search and say, what is ChatGPT? What does it do? And really just ask those questions and research it. Don't be afraid of it. But it is, I will say, it's still okay to say, you know what? No, this is not for me. Make those boundaries still. But research to determine what type of data is being used.
And so there's different ways like people can look at before they download an app or something, and it'll say, here's the kind of data it collects and how it'll be used. So making sure that we just pay attention to those things. And so when it comes to thinking ahead to the future, you mentioned some of the ways it may change. And I know this is pure speculation, but what do you think from, having seen kind of dozens of people exploring these things and tested out different platforms? Where do you see it going? What do you think is going to happen?
So this question's interesting because I even remember playing with, not knowing it at the time, but AI in middle school. There's
Okay.
been chatbots around for a while. I think, yes, it is a great tool. It's advancing rapidly. It's a huge hot topic in research, especially in educational technology. I don't think it's as advanced as it really is at this point. AI is based on whoever creates it. So there's biases written actually within the code because we're humans. So of course we have bias. And I think that though it's so interesting to see so many different AIs pop up. In fact, I was doing some upskilling on Udemy and they suddenly were like, oh, here's AI that can track kind of what you're doing with your courses. And that was completely new because they didn't have AI before, and you can find it in learning management systems like Canvas and Blackboard, for instance. But I think that, yes, it's advanced now, but I think it's going to take a little bit of time. Isn't going to take over every single job. I would argue, I think it's contextual. I don't think that every single community, every single job is going to be impacted by this, but I could be completely wrong. Who knows? Maybe it will, maybe it won't. I just don't think it's as great right now. As I actually recommend you to, again, use ChatGPT, ask it a question and see how it writes it. Like, people think it's the best written thing in the world. I would argue, there's better stuff. There's issues.
Yeah.
And I think that you just have to be critical with things. And especially moving forward, don't believe everything that people report about whether AI is going to take over the world. That's not true. It could, there's potentiality for it to really start mainstreaming into a lot of jobs, but it's just going to change how we work as humans, as with any technology does.
There's some international students who will come to the US, and then there's these technologies available, or they're driving for the first time, or they're, have a laundromat available all the time for the first time. That's that context that you're talking about. There might be places where we can not only maybe avoid it, but also don't have access to it, right?
Yes.
Some of the schools are still completely blocking AI.
Yep. Because concerns of cheating and plagiarism, which is understandable, and also just they block a lot of apps already. I think too, though, it's any new technology, it's scary at first, but then once we kind of get used to it, we're able to be critical about it and think about the ethical implications. Yeah, we really just have to rely on one another. It's all about community. So yes, if maybe in 30 years, if AI does come in and start taking over jobs, we have to rely on one another. That's how I always approach it. We have to rely on community to see how we can help others and
feed the hungry, clothe the naked,
exactly,
drink to the thirsty. AI is not going to bury the dead.
No.
But it might help us analyze maybe statistics on how cemeteries are being used, or, budgets for how we're affording food to feed to people, so.
There's wonderful capabilities of it for sure. I would never shy away. I mean, it's fantastic, in terms of how it can help you streamline a lot of things. But I'm sure, again, you've already talked about the ethical side.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. I really appreciate you.
I appreciate being here just to talk about it. It's a lot of fun.
For our listeners who may want to hear more about how AI is being used specifically in Catholic schools in our Diocese of Youngstown, we have a great article by Pete Sheehan, which you can find at catholicecho.org. And when we come back, we'll continue our conversation about artificial intelligence.
Wondering what happened to timely Catholic news in the Diocese of Youngstown? It's at catholicecho.org. Sign up for the email newsletter while you're there to have Catholic news delivered to your inbox.
Welcome back. I'm Megan Farrell, Communications Director in the Diocese of Youngstown. We're continuing our conversation about how Catholics and Christians are responding to AI, or artificial intelligence. The Catholic Echo magazine has a great article by Pete Sheehan about AI in our Catholic schools, so please check that out at catholicecho.org for some more in-depth coverage and lots of examples. I am joined in the studio today by Steven Jones, our Superintendent of Catholic Schools, to share his perspective on our Catholic response to this new technology. Thank you so much for joining us.
Happy to be here.
So, to just get us started defining AI in the context of Catholic schools, can you tell us a little bit more about what does that mean, especially from the student perspective?
Sure. I think there's a lot of misunderstandings about what AI is and what it can be used to generate. The reality is, for most students, AI is a search tool that they use to find information on, let's say, a topic they're writing about, right? One of Shakespeare's sonnets or, some historical event or something like that. Where AI is a little bit different than just, say, Google or some other search engine is that the other search engines they'll produce information for you, but all you do is look at it. What AI will do is actually generate that information into an essay form. That's the way most students encounter AI in schools. They're using it as a search engine that then compiles what they're looking at. And that's what's different than just, say, for instance, Google or Yahoo or one of the other search engines that have been around for, as far as their students are concerned, have been around forever.
Right, yeah,
So
their whole lives.
AI is something new in education. We've never really had the ability to simply ask a computer to generate a 5-paragraph essay on Shakespeare's use of symbolism. AI will do that for you. And, back when I was a college professor, I remember this first started to come out. And so when I started tinkering with AI for the first time, some of the more well-known venues online, ChatGPT and some things like that, I gave it increasingly complex challenges. And frankly, what it produced was often really good. Now, sometimes it was way off.
Right, yes.
It can't always read, everything in your voice, or it can't tell if you're, using a word that sounds like another word or something like that. But I was actually pretty impressed with the ability, even at that rudimentary level, to generate information that was pretty impressive.
Yeah, even at the college level.
The crazy thing is you can literally tell AI to make grammatical mistakes and write this on the 8th grade level or the 10th grade level. And that leads us to what I think is the most pressing immediate challenge with AI in terms of schools. And that is that our students are using it as a crutch, some. They're using it to essentially do the work for them.
Right.
And obviously that raises challenges about personal integrity, about the value of hard work, and the feeling of accomplishment that one has when you're done with something that was a challenge, which is really and truly probably the most important part of education, right? More than an individual paper that I wrote, I learned how to write. I learned how to think. I learned how to construct an argument or persuade someone who disagreed with me. AI is going to undermine all of that when it's used to do the work for the student.
Yeah.
That's our big concern.
This actually leads me to my next question, which is about, I know in the context of, in the state of Ohio, there's a new law coming out next July requiring all schools to have a policy regulating how mobile devices and personal devices are used. And one of the issues with that, is that concern about cheating and AI. Can you talk a little bit about how you're addressing that aspect of kind of limiting certain devices, and then what else are you providing technologically for students to help them?
Sure. Yeah, we can't live in a bubble. The last thing I want, especially at the high school level, the last thing I want is to create a technology-free environment that the students inhabit for 8 hours a day or whatever, because that's not where they live any other time, and it's not the workforce, right? So we have to learn how to interact with technology responsibly and to use it to our advantage, because it's an incredible tool, right? I have researched in libraries all over the world, from my house here in Youngstown. That's pretty awesome. And technology makes that possible. Most of our schools have some kind of one-to-one program, so we're providing them either with an iPad or some kind of Chromebook or something like that. And the role of the teacher then becomes, how do you use this tool to further what we're doing, not to replace what we're doing, not to make the computer do the work for you. That's the challenge in education right now. The one-to-one programs have been around long enough. I think when they first came out, they could be a bit of a challenge in the classroom. Teachers had to learn to use the technology as well. We're past that for the most part. Our teachers are pretty adept with this stuff now. We're always a few years behind the students. They're always quicker to pick up new things. Yeah. But in terms of what we need to use it for in the classroom, we're doing a pretty good job. Again, AI is going to be a challenge here simply because it is new and it's rapidly changing. Over the space of a few months, new tools come out, new abilities of AI to construct essays or whatever. That changes so rapidly that it's really difficult for a teacher to keep up.
And I'm interested in your perspective, not only as the superintendent, but also as a parent of children in Catholic schools. How are you handling this as a family, and what recommendations would you have for other Catholic families?
Yeah, so my primary concern here right now with my children who are still in my home is about integrity, right? I don't want them to put their heads in the sand and pretend this technology doesn't exist, but I want them to learn to use it responsibly. And I want to know that when I ask them, did you write this? Or when a teacher says, is this your work? I want them to be able to answer that question in the affirmative and mean it the way that I mean it. I do think on the grandest level, and this is something that educators kind of talk about, off the books a little bit, AI is going to challenge our very understanding of what it means to be the author of something. And I've had conversations with students of good conscience who have told me, yes, it's my work because I told AI what to do. And they consider that their work. And I kind of get where they're coming from, but again, that sense of accomplishment is different. AI is going to do exactly what you said, but anybody who's ever written anything knows that you can kind of go off on a tangent, and sometimes those tangents are the most productive intellectually. Yes. Well, that's lost here. It's not your tangent anymore. It's AI's tangent,
Yes.
So I'm having conversations with my own kids about, look, when I say, is this your work, I mean, are you responsible for the ideas here, the way they're put together, and how they're communicated to your audience? Yeah. My kids thus far, I think, have lived up to that, and I'm proud of them and grateful to them for that. But they've also come to me a few times and said, hey, I put this question in ChatGPT, and this is what I got. Can you look at this for a second? And I kind of look and say, I'll look at it, but you're not turning this in.
Right.
Now, I do think, by the way, Megan, that there are teachers who are using ChatGPT or some other AI technology to teach students how to assess good versus bad argumentation. So if the teacher uses AI to generate material that the students then have to evaluate, I think that's a great tool. That's a great resource. But when a student says, this is my work, I want them to mean it in the way that I mean it. These are your ideas, and you're responsible for the argumentation and the construction here.
Yeah. Are there any specific tools that you recommend that do a better job than, say, ChatGPT on things like attribution and, kind of respecting intellectual property that have maybe generated their databases?
That's a great question. I'm probably not ready to answer that in an informed way. Problem there is I've experimented with several different AI programs, but there's a new one every day. And some of the ones I might say, I looked at this, probably don't even exist anymore, or at least don't exist anymore under the same title.
Right.
So that's kind of hard for me to keep up with.
Yeah, it's almost like the .com bubble where there were just a million websites, and now we have Amazon.
Yeah. Now we all go to one.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah,
exactly.
Same thing.
Thank you so much for joining us on this podcast. Steven Jones, we really appreciate your perspective and your insight here. For more information on AI in our Catholic schools and anything you hear on our podcast, please visit us at catholicecho.org.
The Catholic Echo podcast is a production of the Roman Catholic Diocese of Youngstown. Your host has been Dennis Biviano.